be helpful and transformational. You are here in our presence this morning as we celebrate your grace and your comfort. Amen.
Amen.
Some scripture is rougher than others, isn't it? And that was the communion scripture. I didn't see anybody walk back there for a sandwich during the silent reflection time, just based on the scripture today. It's interesting to look, and sometimes when we talk about Job, those are also some of the scriptures that are difficult, but I thought this was great, and for Dylan to read it from the Message Bible was perfect. Because it's more of the language that, like, we get it, and thank you so much. Very well done. Thank you, Dylan. Reading the scripture, no matter where it is, sets us apart. It sets us apart because we have words and something to interpret and take from. It sets us apart as a church because some churches become so topic-oriented that they forget this word, this important tool that we use in our church. The communion scripture, and today, while I tend to want to say celebrate Black History Month because we must celebrate those people who have helped us, all allies who have helped us. Yes. But is it a celebration when there's so much work to be done?
Yes.
Is it a celebration when there are people still not accepted? And we can't imagine the hurt and the pain that still people are going through today. It is a wonderful time to celebrate every person and ally and Black people and people of color, all people of all different colors who make a difference in our world and fight for social justice and look for true, authentic fairness. Last night, and I apologize if you're online, this wall was filled with words like fear, depression, anger, heartbroken, shame. And then what we did at the end of this event that we had, we covered all those words with love. Now I find it really cool to work with Dan as our worship leader because I had no idea what he was going to say today. That it is the light that brings us, that it's not the darkness, it is the light. So I was like, exactly what I was going to say. Dan and Martin Luther King Jr. Sitting at the lunch counter in Woolworths in 1960, four not well-known people who described themselves as unimportant, college students in Greensboro. They knew that the separation was wrong and peacefully took charge of that separation to help make it right. They set off a storm of sit-ins, years of sit-ins. These were less known people of the civil rights movement. Each day went by that these four unknown Greensboro four college students, unknown, sat at this lunch counter. We hear about it thinking it was one day. They sat there every day for lunch for 5 months. Can you imagine going to the same table, heaping the hate towards you, doing it purposefully? Can't order lunch, by the way. Whites only. Sat there from February until July. And on July 25th, 1960, the manager finally said to four women who worked at Woolworths, please go to the break room, change into your regular street clothes, and come and order lunch. The policy changed. It changed the world. But the storm that it set off were other peaceful sit-ins at other places, other ways where you could just sit down, make a point, make a difference, through peace, through no words of their own, but just showing up, saying, this piece of our world is not right. This peaceful protest created change. It is a communion in a way to me because it was a meal. The meal was not eaten for 5 months until the employees were there to eat that meal and order that meal from the kitchen. Communion at Indigo Valley Church is a little bit different. A little bit different than other churches. But I believe it is more like what Jesus had in mind and in store for his disciples. You see, as I say, every Sunday, and there's a reason that we have communion every Sunday. It is the most sacred and holy meal, and I hope that you feel filled. And the reverence that Dylan talked about is a real thing. God is asking us, and Jesus was asking us to have that reverence for this meal, to transcend into your life. Jesus, as I say every Sunday, chose to meet with his disciples in a separate location, and there's many reasons why. It was during a time of Passover. It was during a time that people got together and had supper. And certainly he went to a separate location because the end of his meal was not like the traditional, it's okay, she's good, the traditional Passover meal. He moved to a different location because the rest of the community wasn't there. And in talking about communion, the bread, the wine, and do this in remembrance of me, has nothing to do with Passover. The 4 questions in the Jewish tradition of Passover are, and it is a beautiful, beautiful, it is one of my favorite holidays, Passover, because the ever-reaching, the global thread of Passover is asking, why don't we have peace yet? Why isn't there peace yet? Why isn't there peace yet? Why isn't there peace yet? We are still having to cover those words that are so prevalent in our minds. Fear and hate and depression and heartbroken and shame. We're covering and covering and covering with one another's loves. The 4 questions are, oh, Julie can come up and say them. On all other nights we eat bread, while on this night we eat only matzah. On all other nights we eat all kinds of vegetables and herbs, but on this night we have to eat bitter herbs. On all other nights we don't dip our vegetables in salt water, but on this night we dip them twice. On all other nights we eat while sitting upright, but this night we eat reclining. Those questions when you are at a Passover meal make sense because it's a very different way of eating. It's a very different way of asking again and again, where is the peace in our world? When I was young, I went to a wedding, and I can't remember which side. You know when there used to be more sides, bride and groom? Okay. And I was sitting on one side. I went with my mom. And we were sitting there, and it was in a church with a faith tradition where you had to be part of that faith tradition to take communion. And so the groom's family, the groom's friends, that whole side went up and took communion. And the bride she stood there holding a red rose through this entire prayers and communion. She stood there, and she stood there, and she stood there. And her family sat there, and her friends sat there. She was not part of that sacred Eucharist. She was not welcome to the table. In celebration of Black History Month, in the next few weeks, we will be remembering those who helped create change, those who are unwelcome at the proverbial table, those less known than those names that we might know, like Martin Luther King Jr. We need all of us. We need all people, the past, the history, to know our history, to move that needle of love ever so slightly. In the Torah, it says, if you save one life, you've saved the world entire. That's true. Because although in helping someone else, you may not have saved your world, but you sure have helped theirs. And if we move that needle of love forward, ever so small, but then we all start doing it, then it's moving, and our world is spinning in a completely new and fresh direction. Yes. Those people who helped change the face of the civil rights movement did it for freedom and did it out of love. Those who were no longer willing to be separate, to simply have lunch. The Greensboro Four were just some of those people. The women who were the employees. Can you imagine what they said in the break room? The manager wants us to what? I suspect they were Black, And then they had to walk up to that lunch counter, like, okay, we're not dressed like the employees any longer, they're uniformed. Then they are sitting there. Imagine the fear they felt. Like, and someone saying it's okay, but to move forward as the employees, they were the less known people and allies for us all. The disciples of Jesus were also those people. The disciples helped lead a way to change, a new way of life, to follow our Messiah, to share a special meal together. For Jesus to say, follow him and eat this meal was a big deal. It went against 613 Jewish laws, by the way. Follow me. You don't need to worry about those laws. That's huge. And during Passover and separation. 2 years ago, I was working with a healthcare facility, and another church would come in, and I heard this story. They would come in to serve communion. And this was an assisted living facility, and so people have, all different types of care levels, from really almost independent, still driving, still doing things, to pretty heavy care. Wheelchairs, walkers, canes, needing assistance. Well, this particular gentleman had dementia, and he was given the host and dropped it, where the host was quickly picked up, taken away. This man was not then served communion, and was put on a list to not be served communion again. Not serve this sacred meal because he was not like everyone else. Not serve this sacred meal because he needed assistance. He needed help. He wanted and needed this sacred meal. I assure you, after I heard that, I went and served communion to everyone who could take communion and could take in food and sustenance. And those who could no longer take in food because of perhaps swallowing issues were blessed with essential oils by me. Those are things that are intolerable to me. It grieves me. It physically hurts me when I hear that. Those who are in need perhaps need it the most. Then something is swept away and put on a list and a no. It's not acceptable.
No, it's not.
Who are we holding back when we don't share this meal? We are also holding ourselves back. My personal theology is, what if? What if people come to this meal, this sacred Eucharist, and are changed by it? Why, I hope you are. Every week you're here. I hope we are somehow changed by that life and that resurrection of Jesus, who said, do this in remembrance of me. And told his disciples, share this meal, do this often. Jesus served the one that would betray him. Ever felt betrayed? Served the person anyway? Tried to move on? We do. Jesus served the meal to his disciples. The disciples did not then go out and serve the meal to Christians only, by the way. They probably didn't serve the meal to any Christians, by the way. These were Jewish people. That's important to remember when you come up here. The sacredness of that act. The bravery of, first of all, Jesus of Nazareth during his life. To share this meal. And those disciples, like the employees. Really? He wants us to what? Put on our discipleship, whatever that is, and go serve this and say this and mention it to others. Has anyone here ever invited someone to church? Does it feel strange? Sometimes it can. Depending on the situation, depending on the person. It can feel like, I don't want to get into your personal life, but I love this place and I know you'd love it too. But imagine if no one was talking about Christianity. Everybody was of one faith tradition. And you were saying, look, the 613 rules, by the way, it's okay. And let's have this meal and do this in remembrance of our risen Christ. Wow. The disciples served it anyway. Your invitation happens anyway.
Yes.
Same as the men at the lunch counter at Woolworths. They did it anyway. They did it every day. They were not served every day. This was not because these gentlemen wanted lunch. Let's be clear. These gentlemen wanted access, fairness, and justice. Jesus wanted access, fairness, justice. I suspect there was a lot going on in that ancient world as well. And our Messiah was here, was killed for it. He wanted access, fairness, and justice. He wanted to ensure that everyone could eat this meal and remember him. These people and the tens of thousands after wanted to ensure that people could sit at a Woolworths lunch counter. And I can't tell you how many times I personally sat at a Woolworths lunch counter in the late 1960s. Because they had this like puffy cheesecake. And my grandma would bring me to downtown Minneapolis. I had no idea. But I know Woolworths, and I know that lunch, those little, we had swivelly ones in Minneapolis, that was so fun. And the puffy cheesecake. I had no idea all of this was happening. I'm sure my grandma did. Just those simple ways in our world that we can invite someone to the lunch counter for fairness, for justice, for equality. We remember Do we remember Bayard Rustin? Do we remember Ella Baker? Do we? Yes, thank you. Thank you for a few people saying yes. God bless you. Do we remember Viola or the names of the Greensboro Four? Who are these people? We're going to learn about these people in the next few weeks. Part of what's helpful at Indigo, thank you, Chelsea, thanks so much, is also education. About the Bible, about our community, about how we do things here, the way our communion table works, the way our worship table works. And for now, I ask you, not maybe knowing these people or not knowing these people that we're going to learn about, for now, what can you do? What do you do? I already know. We have so many ministries growing. Man, it's like a whole garden of things, of people, of ways, of growth. And it's like we want to reach out. We want the roots to come down at Indigo, but we want to branch out to authentically help people for justice and fairness. What you can do today is take communion. And do that in remembrance of Jesus. And remember those disciples who risked probably their own lives to go to that separate location, to take communion, to say, not so sure about those laws. I'm going to believe and follow you, Jesus. Not so easy. With a fresh look at communion, and when you take communion, think about the justice of it. The fairness of communion at Indigo. Invite your own fairness and justice to your life today as you take communion. And when you are here for this holy and sacred meal, remember and know these things. You are loved. You are a part of God and made, created by God. You are a part of this wonderful community. You are the face of God. So in remembrance to all who have come before us, we come today to celebrate this sacred meal and to remember all of those who have helped us get to this table today. Amen.
Amen.